Chris, maybe let's chat about the fact that when it comes to the African context, Simisola mentioned obviously the development of technology and other factors. Specifically in the African context, technology isn't the only aspect that we're looking at because it's not not highly available within South Africa, and there's a number of factors that affect it.
Yeah, that's completely right. I mean, I agree with a lot of the points that Simisola mentioned. And, when we're talking about smart mobility, it really comes down to equity. And in most African cities, the vast majority of commuters are walking, they're cycling, they're using public transport. And if we're not catering to these modes, then we really haven't created an equitable mobility system. And at the core of this is the way that we allocate our road space. Okay, we need to make sure that we prioritize pedestrians, cyclists, public transport users, that we make their mobility safe, that we make it efficient, that we make it convenient, like Simisola mentioned. And so we have to really change the approach. In most cases where cities are still investing in wider roads, elevated highways, flyovers, these are mainly benefiting a minority of the users. So in Nairobi, where I stay, only 13% of trips are by car. And yet the majority of investments are catering to this small minority. And so we have to really move away from these elitist projects and move toward much more equitable mobility systems that provide better service for all.
So my question to that is, obviously, with us here in South Africa, you in Kenya, and Simisola, you're in Lagos, we have very dense populations where we're actually struggling now to even get cars on the road. How do we then incorporate that? Because I don't see me driving on a bicycle down the N1 from Joburg to Pretoria.
We need to make it safe for you to do so. That's the problem. We've designed a transport system that's completely centered around car users, and usually it's designed around the male commuter. And it simply doesn't cater to the needs of many of the residents in our cities. And we've been basing the designs of our transport infrastructure on models from the US, the AASHTO Highway Manual, and designing roads for cars. But our African cities are much more diverse. Like, we have a lot of people walking, we have people using public transport. And so unless we change the way we design our infrastructure, we can't expect everyone to suddenly change modes. We have to make it convenient to do so.
Mm-hmm. How do we?
Yes, and as Chris has said, for us in Lagos, it's the flip side. 90% of our trips are actually motorized by private vehicles. And what we have done in LAMATA, the Lagos Metropolitan Area Transport Authority, is actually developed an NMT policy in 2018, just 2 years ago, that really focuses on how do we drive, increase in NMT, how do we make it easier for pedestrians. Is not enough to say, oh, we need to improve NMT, but how do we do that? And I know one of the key things in the policy is actually the design of the sidewalks, actually, beyond just concentrating on international standards, but driving it back to our local context. What works for us? One of the characteristics of Lagos roadways is we have informal traders on the road. Any space you have informal traders. They just come with their wares and they put it there and they sell to pedestrians. So what we have done in the design is actually incorporate spaces to allocate for such informal traders. So it's something we know that we're never going to get rid of them. So what we're doing is actually creating marked spaces in the new design of sidewalks, and we actually have a pilot test that is rolling out early next year. We actually got funds for that, and it's in one of our busiest economic hubs in Lagos State, called Lagos Island. So what we're doing is we're actually building a newly designed sidewalks that would accumulate all these key design factors that we have come up with, and see how it meets our need. And from there, we take it across the entire state and actually drive, this inclusiveness of non-motorized transports.
Maybe you could talk to us perhaps about some of the key lessons that you have learned within your own rolling out of these aspects towards or within your countries. Chris, maybe we can start with you.
Sure. I think one of the biggest lessons, and it's really come out more during the pandemic, that we have to transform the business model for public transport. So in most cities and countries around the continent, we're still expecting public transport to operate purely as a private business. We leave it all to the private sector, and we say that government doesn't have any stake. It's just up to the private operators. And so what happened during, with COVID-19 is that when, countries put in occupancy restrictions and so the operations became less profitable, and these costs just got passed directly on to customers, in most cases. And so people are, facing higher fares at the same time that they're, fewer people are employed. There are a lot of challenges during the pandemic. And so it's really revealed that we have to change this business model if we want our public transport to be resilient. And we want it to be able to provide equitable mobility to all users. We have to shift the model, and that means moving away from having the operator remuneration tied to just the number of passengers who ride, which is the way it works today, to having it based on, for instance, the number of kilometers that you operate, and that way you can have a structured process for government to start investing in the service. And we've seen this, in South Africa, the formal bus systems like the BRTs in Cape Town and Joburg and Tshwane have kilometer-based payments like that, and they receive subsidies. But it's not happening for the informal sector. And we need to see that kind of support extended, because we subsidize the road infrastructure. We subsidize travel on highways and flyovers. So why can't we also subsidize the public transport that's being used by the majority of the residents?
All right, before we go to use Simisola, I just want to welcome Lance, who's joining us now. He's the Chief Officer at the Gauteng Automotive Industry Development Center. Lance, glad to have you with us.
Thank you, and I'm very glad to be here. Apologies, it seems we had some ICT challenges, so I could hear you at the feed, and unfortunately I couldn't respond to your opening question, but just once again, good morning to you and good morning to my fellow panelists, the MEC, and all of the other officials and guests that are in the call.
All right, Lance, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to swing back to a question to you before we go to Simisola about the lessons learned on the implementation of projects within Lagos. And I just wanted to ask you, Lance, obviously we're looking at the African continent as a whole, but in South Africa, a lot of people aren't really aware of the concept of smarter mobility. What are we looking at it within the South African space?
All right, so I think what's important in looking at smarter mobility is not only what is happening in the South African context, but where the opportunities reside for the African continent and the diaspora as a whole. And I think if we look at the MEC's opening remarks, he wanted to get an understanding of smarter mobility. I think smarter mobility has three key pillars that one has to look at. The one is economic enablement, to ensure one takes account of where the infrastructure requirements are, because to embed any form of smarter mobility or to have a revolution within Africa, one would have to ensure that there's optimized road infrastructure. So economic enablement is absolutely important as an imperative. The second aspect of that is social mobility. We know that by and large that there are huge pockets of areas within Africa that are underdeveloped. We also need to ensure that the political dispensations are stable and safe and secure. So I think what's very important also is to take aspects of the 4R, ensuring that there's an interconnectedness also between the very cell phone application that gets used, for example, with the ride-hailing schemes, and also connecting that social mobility in terms of the typology of transport that our people use by and large in their daily lives. I just want to make a very quick comment as well about Africa. I think what's important to note is currently there's 8 out of the 15 largest economies in terms of development is actually within Africa. So this presents an ideal opportunity in a post-COVID environment to have a look at the constraints that's largely fixed around resource availability, the safety of the commute, as well as the financial constraints that's associated with it.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Lance. Simisola, I'm going to get back to you on this one now. Some of the lessons that you guys have learned within Lagos and the implementation of your smart mobility systems.
So I would just piggyback off what Chris and Lance have said. LAMATA is the authority regulating transportation in Lagos, and we implemented the first BRT many years ago, like 13 years ago. And we just recently in August launched the new BRT scheme. And one of the things we did was actually take lessons learned from the implementation of the first BRT and use it to implement this new BRT. Now, one of such things were the operating model. What operating model do we use? We also incorporated things like multiple operators. So what we as the government and the LAMATA or the authority are doing is trying to be more involved, as Chris has said. Based off of the COVID-19 pandemic, there were a lot of restrictions that we had to put in place. You know, we had to reduce the capacity of the bus, the carrying capacity of the buses significantly, and this resulted in a lot of loss of revenue. But we had to do that for the security and the safety of all commuters and all Lagosians. So, for example, on the new BRT, we have multiple operators. We know that we need technology to drive this kind of multi-complex, we have 3 operators, which is, you know, on one 13-kilometer BRT lane. So we have to use schedules because we understand what commuters want, what the commuters want. They want to be able to get to the bus stop and be able to get on the bus at the set time that the bus is going to arrive. So we're using ITS to drive such deliverables, and all these are lessons from the first BRT. And right now, so far so good. And over 2 months that we have operated, save for the we had some challenges last week in Lagos. I don't know if anybody has seen that, but save for last week, we've had smooth operations, and it's been actually good to see an improved technology-based BRT system. One of the key things we also did in terms of lessons learned was also the fare collection. The initial BRT, the first BRT, was launched with paper-based tickets, and over the years, we've observed how, you know, we need some form of technology based to aid in planning, to aid in revenue security. And with that, we've implemented an integrated electronic ticketing system. And this system is actually going to be integrated with the rail. We're looking at passenger operations for the rail by the end of 2023. So it's going to be a centralized ticketing system that will be used for travel across Lagos. And we've also integrated this with the ferry system. And it's just to tie to your question, you know, all these are based on lessons learned. And we're gathering a lot of data right now to ensure that we just keep optimizing the system and keep doing what it is that's required to meet commuters' needs, to meet the government's needs, and to meet the needs of, you know, of the environment.
I think before we carry on, just a quick one. We do have a Q&A session coming up after this with the panelists. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to add them into the chat section, and we will ask our panelists your questions. My next question to you, though, is obviously we know there's some key factors that we need to really improve on smarter mobility in Africa as a whole. What are those key factors? Chris, maybe you want to take this one.
Yeah, great. Well, yeah, as I said, a key part of this is reallocating road space. So we need to change this model of having, you know, just designing our streets from cars to having good walkways, wide walkways that are shaded, that make it comfortable for people to walk. Also, continuous cycle tracks. You know, cities need complete cycle networks so that it's easy and safe for people to cycle. You know, many trips in cities around the continent are very short. You know, they're under 5 kilometers, and so that's a kind of trip link that's very easy to shift to cycling, provided that we have safe infrastructure for people to do it. And then finally, having dedicated lanes for public transport. You know, whether this takes the form of bus lanes or BRT. Like, you know, we've been hearing about the excellent work Lagos has been doing. You know, creating high quality median line BRT. And we need to see that in many more cities, because with a single BRT lane can carry nearly 10,000 passengers in a single hour in a direction, and compared to just a 1,000 or 2,000 in a car lane. And so if we really want to move people on our streets without having to make massive investments in road infrastructure, we have to create dedicated space for public transport, because that's the only way that we can get out of this vicious cycle of building more road space, and then more people buy cars and try to use them. The roads fill up, we try to do it again. There's no way to break out of this by building more roads and flyovers and elevated highways. So we have to invest in public transport. We have to make sure that it has dedicated space, and we have to transform the business model so that our informal sector can start operating very high quality services in those dedicated lanes.
Lance, anything you want to add to that?
Yes, thank you. And I think building on what Chris has just said, I think there's two key elements that we need to address. One is very poor spatial planning that still exists largely throughout the African continent. The second, as I'd mentioned earlier on, is poor infrastructure. Infrastructure not only of rail and ports, but also ensuring that the requisite road infrastructure is put in place. A very interesting statistic, I think, is important to note. So as of 2014, only a quarter of the African road networks has actually been paved. That situation has not dramatically improved in recent years. I think also the delay with social and economic transformation of African societies has also been a significant barrier to ensure that we've got a full social mobilization and that we do improve the urban centers. The infrastructural upgrades will have an unintended consequence of ensuring that there's movement of people that's aligned with it, and that we can have the enjoyment of solutions for the type of solutions that we are seeing playing itself out, such as the ride-hailing schemes, the car-sharing scheme, vehicles on demand, the interconnectedness between bicycles, electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles, the internal combustion engine vehicles, ensuring also that we've got an integrated approach to that to connect urban, peri-urban, as well as rural areas, is very important to embed the idea, and the fundamental of mass people transport, I think, is going to be important in terms of minibuses, and that still largely remains a preferred means of transport for a vast majority of our people.
Simisola, anything from you on that one? I see you nodding in agreement.
Yes, because the minibus is actually, as Lance has said, one of the you can't take it away. And another thing you can't take away is the informal sector. So you have to find a way of actually integrating the minibus informal sector with any form of regulated or smarter mobility, in order to achieve your aim. So I just want to add that, those two things you can't really take away.
I think obviously at the moment we're all sitting here. I'm sitting in my studio in Gauteng. They managed to get us a beautiful looking studio. You guys are all the way in different parts of the world. One of the biggest things that's impacted our lives is, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic. What does that effect have on the smart mobility movement? Chris, do you want to take that one? I see you unmuted yourself.
Sure. Yeah, sure. I'll start with that. Yeah, I think so. One of the things that we saw during the pandemic is, a lot of people wanted to start cycling as a safe way to travel during COVID-19. But then when they went out, they found that they didn't have a safe place to do so, right? And so one of the key findings is that we really need to pick up the pace, start developing cycle networks in our cities. They need to be safe, so not just painted bike lanes, but they need to be physically separated, protected bike lanes. With good intersection design. So that's a key change that needs to happen, and would allow us to relieve some of the pressure on public transport. It's been happening around the world. A lot of cities, Bogota did 35 kilometers of pop-up bike lanes. Paris has done 50, and they have 650 planned. So a lot of cities are working on this, but we've been very slow to take action in the Africa region. So I'd really like to see us do something about that. And then, as I mentioned, for public transport, working to provide support. So one of the good examples, just as of a few days back, is Kigali in Rwanda, where they've started providing subsidies to their public transport, where they, so that they can maintain the customer fares at the same levels that they were pre-pandemic. And so that's the kind of move that we need to see. And the reason that it was easier for Rwanda to do that was because they had already gone through that process of formalizing their minibus operators into 3 main bus companies in Kigali. So they had these formal companies set up. The drivers are salaried. They're able to take bank loans to buy high quality vehicles. So because they had done the homework to get through that transformation process, it was much easier for them to issue these subsidies because they had formal companies that they could negotiate with. So I think that's the direction we need to go, because in most cities we haven't gone through that process. We haven't done the hard work of working to set up more formal structures, to build the capacity of the public transport sector so that they can operate modern bus services.
Lance?
I think what's important to note is to take account of the economic landscape of Africa, requiring huge amounts of fixed capital formation, huge amounts of investment. I think that one of the game-changing initiatives is the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. That is expected to open up what essentially would become the largest customs union in the world, the movement and facilitation of both goods and services in the order of 90%, in terms of harmonization of the customs regime, harmonizing customs and duties. I think that's going to present a very real opportunity in terms of mobility and what we're going to expect in the coming period. I think a very interesting statistic also is that we're expecting the African continent to grow by 2.5 billion people over the next 20 to 30 years. I think as Gauteng has been very proactive in engaging with other markets such as Kenya, Uganda, Nigeria in terms of automotive manufacturing, and to have a look at how that can embed the structure as we look at post-COVID recovery within Africa. But I do think that we cannot be mute to the economic realities that a number of countries are facing, and ensuring that robust policies are put in place that addresses the need to ever increasingly have social mobility and smarter mobility within Africa.
Simisola?
I agree with what they both said. For us in Lagos, one of the key things we observed during COVID, post-COVID, what we're observing now is actually our commuters, they actually are requesting more on-demand services. So as opposed to, we already walk a lot in unfortunately, at least 60% of commuters in Lagos walk for at least 45 minutes every day to complete their trip. That's a lot. So one of the things that we've realized is that they want on-demand services. So they want to be able to book a seat on a bus, or know that the bus is going to arrive when it is. So for us, we're looking at how do we, give that to our commuters, and we're looking at bringing in partner in private sector in terms of bringing in such technologies, and also fulfilling our NMT policy. So we're actually trying to get that pilot test up and running, and then deploy across the state altogether, just to ensure that we have improved transportation post COVID-19 that actually meets the needs of our commuters.
Great. I think we're going into our Q&A session now to see any questions from the audience. I'm just waiting for my team to put them up on the screen if possible. No questions as of yet? Okay, well, put your questions in the comment section, and if you have anything, we will definitely ask the panel. Perhaps in the meantime, is there anything else that you would like to add to this discussion? Maybe let's start with Lance.
No, I think the discussion is certainly something that we are looking forward to participating in with the architecture. We are contributing to various working groups within the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. I think that's a very important platform that we will be using. We've also in the automotive sector formed the Automotive African Manufacturing Forum. I think that's going to be very important. We've already seen some manufacturing activity, and the idea is to have an homogeneous approach towards automotive manufacture and not have vehicle imports to the scale and the size that we're seeing, particularly second-hand vehicles, and looking at an indigenous platform where we can create opportunity for Africans and ensure that we create the type of infrastructure that supports not only economic infrastructure and the movement of those goods to support our economies, but also our people, and ensuring that it's done in a safe, efficient, and a reliable way. Thank you.
Chris, anything you'd like to add?
Sure. I think one other thing I'd like to stress is that we really need to bring Vision Zero to Africa as a way to address road safety challenges in our cities. So, this is something that originated in Northern Europe. Looking at a whole systems approach to improving the safety of our infrastructure. And in most of our cities, what we're seeing is the trend is to build these new roads that are designed for very high vehicle speeds. And we try to get everyone else out of the way. So pedestrians have to go up on footbridges. And so that's not an equitable approach, and it inconveniences the majority of the users of the mobility system. And so Vision Zero would take a different approach, where we actually look at reducing speeds in our cities. If we want to have people traveling at higher speeds, like that should be on by creating dedicated lanes for public transport. But we need to reduce speeds. We need to create safe streets with good crossings, with safe intersection designs, and just changing the whole approach so that we're now thinking about all users, and factoring in that human fallibility, the fact that we make mistakes, and the road design system should be forgiving. It should create conditions so that people can use the road safely, and if they make mistakes, it won't result in the death of or injury of other road users, right? So I think that's a key paradigm, as we're talking about smarter mobility, that we need to bring into a lot of our cities.
Yeah, very true. Simisola, I see that I have a question specifically for you here. The MEC mentioned that rail is the backbone for mobility in Gauteng. How are the projects of LAMATA going on rail systems?
Yeah, so as I mentioned prior, 90% of our trips are by road. What we've done over the last 10 years is actually try to introduce a rail mass transit system to help in improving our public transportation, and we're actually achieving we're looking at passenger operations starting by the end of 2022. So what we've done is we're going to start testing next year, and we'll test for over at least 6 months. And when we test it, then we would now introduce passenger operations. It's important to note that it's only a segment of our first line. We've identified 7 rail lines in Lagos. So the first step was to identify key corridors that would require rail mass transit to move people. And the first line is the blue line, and it's actually 22 kilometers. And we've built approximately 10 kilometers or so, and we're going to start operations on that phase. And then while we construct all the way to the end of the line. So we're eager to actually see the impact of rail on our transportation network, and we're working actively to have that operational.
All right, great. Is there anything else that you would like to add to the conversation? I see there is another question coming through. I'll get that up and running. But in the meantime, is there anything else that you would like to add to the conversation?
Is it okay if I jump in with a quick comment?
Yes,
Sure.
of course.
Okay, yeah, so I just want to say that, yeah, I think, there can be a role for rail where you have very high demand, so where you have, like, say you have over 30,000 passengers going in an hour in a direction. But in most cases, and in most, African cities, the demand's not that high, right? So we have a lot of corridors that might have, 5,000, 10,000, 15,000 passengers per hour per direction. And in those cases, a bus-based system like the BRT that Simisola has been talking about can do the job just fine, right? It can carry those passengers, it can manage those volumes, and it can do that at a fifth to a tenth of the cost. And it can also do it in a more flexible way, because the advantage with bus-based rapid transit is that the buses can exit the dedicated corridor. So they can move into residential areas. They can go directly to where people are staying, and so you can avoid that whole transfer where people have to take a feeder bus or vehicle to get to the rail station, then take the rail. Then at the other end, you have to do another changeover. Yeah. That's really a hassle. And so the way that bus rapid transit system design is going is that it's going toward more of an integrated approach where you move toward having all of the vehicles in your city be BRT compatible, so they can enter the infrastructure where it's available. They can also go out and provide regular service, and that gives you a really flexible system that can provide convenient service for customers. And it's as convenient as the current minibus routes that people are taking, just that they can get into dedicated lanes when they're on the main corridors. And it's also really key, I think, because Lance was talking about the electric vehicles, and I think as buses are going greener, right? So in Uganda is starting to assemble electric buses, and I'm sure we'll see other countries following suit. And so so there's no longer the argument that rail is cleaner than road-based transport, because we have good battery electric technology now. So I think that's another factor for cities to consider when they're trying to weigh rail versus bus.
Well, I'm definitely looking forward to that integrated system that you spoke about, because then I don't have to drive in traffic in Johannesburg. I see there's another question coming through from Sean Cook. It says, how do we change the narrative from smart mobility being techno-optimistic, I think that's what it says, or optimism, towards smart mobility being I can't read that, it's so far, multi-model approach to mobility. You guys can see it as on your screen. I'm slightly blind.
Does someone else want to take this? I can answer, but I
think
go ahead.
Yeah. We're probably all waiting for a hand to say who's going to take this.
Yes.
I think from the onset, the automotive industry is not ideological about issues such as how do we have a supply chain that is efficient, one that is cost optimized, and one that ensures that the goods gets delivered at the right time and in the right place. Over recent years, there hasn't been significant improvements in terms of, for example, our rail corridors, and as a result, there's been a shift of the movement for both raw materials as well as built-up product onto the road system, and that has had an unintended consequence of not supporting the requirements that the OEMs really have. So one of the things that we are going to be intentionally focused on, ensuring that we get our rail infrastructure built up and that it provides for the delivery of the goods at the right time and within the right costing parameters. Because when we service international markets, the overwhelming principle is it has to be done competitively. And we would want to ensure that those same principles applies to some of the other countries that are bringing large-scale automotive manufacturing on stream, with the lessons that we've learned. Added to that, when we talk about multimodal transport, we need to ensure also that we take account of our ports. Some of our ports are very congested. We are trying to ensure that we work with our infrastructure partners such as Transnet to ensure that we look at improving the turnaround times, improving the throughput, and ensuring that we've got a sustainable system. So ultimately, what you require is all of the cogs within the supply chain to be able to produce the efficiencies and in order to have the scale in order to deliver what is being required. And that for us is important principles that's embedded.
All right, I think we have about a minute left. Simisola, do you want to add something to that before we wrap this up?
Yeah, I'll just say that it's very easy to just think that smarter mobility is all about technology. But really, I think such engagements and such discussions that actually show that it's actually about an integrated approach, taking in consideration from the walking to the bus to the rail, if there is a rail, to other modes of transportation is actually very key. That integrated approach is the way that we can achieve smarter mobility in Africa.
Yeah, and if I can
Right.
just jump in to add to what Simisola said. Yeah, just quickly, I agree. And it's like the technology can be part of the solution, but unless we're changing the underlying business models in the case of public transport, and unless we're changing the way that we allocate our street space, we're not going to be able to achieve a smart mobility system in the end. So I'd urge us to look at all those elements besides just the tech piece.
I think that's what we can see is there's a kind of golden thread that runs through all of this. There's certain steps that we need to get in place in order for these elements and these key pillars to be put in place within the African continent and between countries themselves. I'd like to thank you guys all for being with me today and being on this panel. I think it was a great way to start the Smarter Mobility Africa conference as we get a little bit of an insight into exactly what smarter mobility is all about. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.